This is National Educational Television.
The music of each period is a portrait of its time. From this time to this time, chamber music grew and developed as people and customs changed. Just imagine what it would be like to live 400 years ago and hear music played by peoples of various countries dressed in clothes quite different than our own and on instruments that we no longer use. We're going to tell you the story of music written for the string quartet and show you pictures of children of that time. We start in England. The year is 1600. The time about 8 o'clock in the evening. The family has just had dinner, and instead of going to the movies or watching television, gathers around a table and sings and plays for their evening's entertainment. The music looked something like this. As you see, it was written in such a way that each person could read his own part from where he sat. The instruments that they used were called viols, and they resembled our violin, viola, and cello, but instead of being held under the chin, they were played on the knee. And they could hardly hold a violin, as you can see from this picture of a little girl of that time. They could hardly hold a violin under their chin because of this very large collar, which we don't use anymore, as you can see from the way you're dressed. We're going to play for you a composition called Fantasia, written by one of the most famous composers of that time, Orlando Gibbons.
I would like to tell you about the next piece we're going to play. Let's skip about 125 years into the beginning of the 18th century. Practically all the kings and noblemen at that time employed a group of musicians at their courts. Many of the gentlemen also were amateur musicians. In fact, they were quite good performers. In the evenings, they would join with these musicians and play for their guests. And I'd like to show you a picture in which we have a scene like that. Bob, could you put that up for me? Thank you. In this picture, you see a very famous king, the King of Prussia, who was a very fine amateur flutist. And that evening, he might have been playing music by Bach or Handel or Telemann. Now, Telemann was a very popular composer of his day, and he wrote much beautiful music. Now, you might say that the quartet was born about 225 years ago. But before we play you a section of this gay little quartet by Telemann, I'd like you to see what you might have looked like while you were listening to the music of Telemann at that time.
While George Washington was growing up in Virginia and becoming the first president of the United States, there was a composer in Europe who was known as Papa Haydn. Now, I think he composed more great quartets than any other composer in the history of music. Actually, I think it's over 80. He worked for a Count Esterhazy who lived in Hungary. And his job was to write and play music for any occasion in which music was needed. Let's pretend that the little serenade we're now going to play, Papa Haydn composed just for this day, and you will be the members of the court who've come to hear this composition. Since I'm doing the talking, Linda, would you take off this picture here and show everybody with the next picture just what you probably would have looked like if you had attended that occasion. Now, Papa Haydn has just sat down to play the first violin part, and you will hear this little serenade as it probably was heard on the very first performance.
At the time that Haydn was writing all these wonderful string quartets, a very remarkable little boy started to make music. His name was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He and his sister played concerts together in most of the big European cities. I think we have a picture over there. Linda, would you take off that one? And here is young Mozart at the piano with his sister and his father playing the violin. Mozart also composed a great deal already. He knew how to play the violin very well, and he played in ensembles with his father and his friends. And later on, he got to really love the string quartet and wrote many pieces. He had especially admired Mr. Haydn's writing of the quartet and dedicated several pieces to him. Well, by this time, this was about the time of the American Revolution or shortly afterwards, the quartet was flourishing in Europe, and every home had quartets. And they all eagerly awaited pieces that were being written and came from the publishers. Well, now you can imagine how excited they were when they got 3 or 6 new quartets that Mozart had written and dedicated to Haydn. And I'd like to have us play one of the movements from a quartet from this set, the last movement from the first quartet dedicated to Haydn.
At the time that Benjamin Franklin was helping to found our country, and incidentally writing a few string quartets, Beethoven was living in Vienna and composing some of our greatest music. Linda, could you show us the next picture, please? This portrait looks very much like Beethoven as a young boy. He wanted more than anything else to write wonderful music, and he dared make his music so original and difficult that the musicians complained that they had to practice harder than ever before. But he demanded perfection of himself, and he would rewrite a melody 100 times until he was satisfied with every single note. Now, if you listen, you will hear the new spirit in this music. The notes rushing at enormous speed, the strong, sharp accents, dramatic changes from soft to loud, and moods that change as suddenly as ours do. And all the 4 instruments are equally important. Beethoven wrote 16 wonderful quartets, and we're going to play the last movement of one of them for you.
In Vienna, while Beethoven was such a famous musician, there was a young man by the name of Franz Schubert who was struggling to earn a living. While he was doing this, he wrote some of the most inspired songs and string quartets the world has ever known. All his music contains the spirit that is so famous in the city of Vienna. Linda, could we have another picture, please? Here is a young girl in the costume of the day of Franz Schubert. Perhaps he just met her and was very inspired and sat down and wrote a melody such as we'll play for you right now, which later became one of his string quartets.
Did you ever think that a great composer might give his compositions such titles as Reflections in the Water, or The Snow is Dancing, or The Little Girl with Flaxen Hair? Well, there was such a composer not so very long ago, and his name was Claude Debussy. Linda, could you help us by taking that picture off the frame? Thanks. Debussy created something new in music. We might call it atmosphere. He loved nature, and his music reminds us of the delicate colors of clouds, the roar of the ocean waves, or the quiet of stars in the night. I think this painting of the little girl is like music by Debussy. If you listen carefully as we play a portion of Debussy's quartet, you'll hear how the plucking, the trilling, and the singing melody suggest soft winds and shimmering sunlight on a beautiful day.
We'd like to play for you now a portion of a quartet by Bela Bartok, who was one of the great contemporary composers of our time. Like Beethoven, he opened up a new world of sound and expression.
heard how composers wrote music, which recreates the atmosphere and the feeling of their own day. I hope we have succeeded in showing you how chamber music has changed from its beginnings in 1600 to the present day by some of the beautiful music we played for you today. In closing, we will play a composition by a well-known contemporary American composer, Walter Piston. This will be the last movement from his first string quartet.
This is National Educational Television.